Okay. Let me know when you're good to go. All okay? Great. Okay, well, thanks everyone for being here today at a very prestigious event being held right here in Brisbane in the Sunshine State of Queensland. Australia is very proud to be co-hosting the United Nations Asia Pacific Ministerial Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction, co-hosting that with the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, and it's a great pleasure to be joined here today by my very good friend, the Premier of Queensland, Annastacia, who's delivered just a fantastic speech about Queensland's experiences with disaster risk reduction, and of course also our co-host, Ms. Mami Mizuturi, the UN Special Representative for Disaster Risk Reduction. This conference has only been going about 24 hours ago or so, but already there have been some incredible lessons learned by all of the attendees about how we can collectively work to reduce disaster risk for our region. Yesterday afternoon we held a ministerial conference where each country gave a short presentation about their concerns about disaster risk reduction and what they were doing to manage those risks. And it was really striking listening to each of those contributions about the shared challenges that this region is facing, being the most disaster-prone region of the world, and also a real desire to work together to address these risks going forward. We know in Australia that in the last 3 years alone we've seen unprecedented bushfires in parts of the country, followed by compounding floods, in some places seeing 4 and 5 floods alone over the last 3 years. And we know that that is replicated right across this region in the Asia Pacific. I was very pleased today to be able to advise the audience of the Albanese government's strong commitment to tackling climate change and also making sure that our communities are better prepared for the future. We have, of course, now legislated strong interim targets for emissions reduction, a target of 43% reduction by 2030 on the way to net zero emissions by 2050. And we're also backing that up with very strong action in the field of disaster prevention by establishing a new national emergency agency that brings together all of the federal functions around disaster management, appointing a new Coordinator General for that position who will start in a couple of weeks' time, also introducing legislation to significantly increase federal spending on disaster mitigation. So we are stepping up to the plate when it comes to disaster risk reduction, but we recognise that as a federal government we have a lot more to do to keep our communities safe, and of course it's going to be really important in pursuing that we cooperate very strongly with our states and territories who have the primary responsibility for disaster management in our country, and of course cooperating again with our good friends and neighbours in the Asia Pacific. I'll leave it at that, but I know the Premier is very keen to talk to you about the great things Queensland's doing on this front as well. Over to you, Premier.
Thanks, Minister. And of course, it's wonderful that the UN is holding this conference here, jointly facilitated with the Commonwealth Government, and the state is also proud to be present here. Of course, we know Queensland's had our fair share when it comes to managing issues such as floods and fires, and cyclones and droughts. And I don't think there has been a part of our state that hasn't been touched in some way by the natural disasters that we are seeing. We are seeing them more frequently, and that is why we acknowledge that climate change is real and is having a big impact not just on our state but on Australia and the Asia Pacific area as well. It's wonderful to welcome a whole lot of international visitors to Queensland. For some people it's the first they've been able to come together since COVID. I'm very proud of the work that Queensland has done in terms of the operation of our Queensland Disaster Management Agency, but also our Reconstruction Authority, which has now put in place even better ways of dealing with building back better. And I was delighted to share with the delegates today a whole range of infrastructure that was damaged across our state and has been built back better and has shown that we can go from crisis to resilience. So with that, I'll hand back to Murray. Thank you.
Thanks, Premier. We'd like to now introduce Ms. Mami Mizuturi, the UN Special Representative for Disaster Risk Reduction.
Thank you very much, Minister. Thank you very much, Premier. I'd like to start by thanking the Government of Australia the Premier, the state of Queensland, city of Brisbane and their people for hosting this conference, which comes at a very important time when all the countries in Asia Pacific and indeed in the world, we are devastated by disasters. But this should not be the case. We have a global blueprint for disaster risk reduction for resilience building, which is called the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015-2030. Our goal together, our collective goal, is to ensure that by 2030 we are living in a world where disasters do not have to devastate, which means that we need to move away from constantly responding to disasters after they devastate our lives to moving more towards prevention, to reducing disaster risk so that ourselves, our future generations do not have to experience the same. We know what to do. This is about tackling the drivers of risk. They are climate change, they are environmental erosion, they are poverty and inequality, the vulnerabilities. We know what to do, but this conference is so important because governments from Asia Pacific, but not only, all stakeholders, civil society organizations, women and girls, the media, private sector, we all come together to share our experience, our challenge, and we find solutions. We find solutions that will reach the communities and will also come from communities. And together we will commit to a more resilient world. So this conference happening here in this beautiful city is so important, and I'm delighted that we have more than 3,000 people attending, which is a testament to the importance of this agenda. Thank you very much, Premier. Thank you very much, Minister. We will work together to make this world resilient. Thank you.
Okay, we're all happy to take questions.
Yeah, Doordarshan India. My first question to Bobby. It's no doubt about floods have devastated the Swat region of Pakistan and northeast region of India, but there is very less attention about the heat waves, which are really threatening the food security. Why?
I believe that the attention is growing because heat waves, which once unfortunately was concentrated in India, in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, now it is becoming a global issue as well. This summer in Europe, heat waves devastated many countries, and we are now in a need to find solutions to this complex but very, very, terrible disaster, which is impacting people's health and the most vulnerable people, because the elderly, the children are the ones who are impacted most. UNDRA will work with our partners to find solutions to heat waves and to bring more attention to it.
Before the federal elections, quite heavy criticism from the Queensland government about the previous federal government's failure to meet them halfway in terms of mitigation. What sort of commitments has the Albanese government made to the Palaszczuk government in terms of making good on that?
Well, for starters, I've had regular discussions with Ministers Mark Ryan, the Emergency Services Minister in Queensland, and the Deputy Premier, Stephen Miles, who of course is in charge of the Queensland Reconstruction Authority. And the mere fact that we are talking and cooperating is a big improvement on what we saw from before the election from the Morrison government. But we are backing that up with real dollars as well as words. What we've already started to do is to work with the Queensland government about delivering a share of the former government's emergency response fund. You might remember I was very critical of the former government before the election about setting up a $4 billion emergency response fund that over 3 years did not build a single disaster mitigation project, didn't spend a cent on disaster recovery, and all it did was earn the former federal government $800 million in interest. But we've been having very productive discussions with the Queensland government since the election about how we will spend a share of that funding in Queensland, and also how we will help Queensland to rebuild and make some of its infrastructure more resilient in the future as well. So just yesterday we actually had a meeting as well all the state and territory emergency management ministers, with myself and with Mami, and with the New Zealand Emergency Management Minister. And even ministers from states that are not of the Labor colour are talking about the fact that there's much better cooperation between the federal and the state governments than there was pre-election, and we want to keep it that way because that's what people expect of us during a natural disaster.
Yes. I think today sets the groundwork for the biggest announcement in the energy and climate change space that Queensland will make, and that will be at the State of the State next Wednesday. It's big. Better come along.
Premier, when are we going to see the IGM report into the February close? When will that be?
Let me just check, but I think when Minister Ryan's back from leave, his wife has just had a baby, so he's on some leave at the moment, so as soon as he comes back. Yeah. So congratulations to Minister Ryan and Holly.
Have you been able to see those findings of that?
Sorry?
Have you seen that report?
I've seen parts of it, and it'll be released as soon as he's back. Yeah.
This report into the forensic.
Okay, there's no more issues for Murray. Okay, thank you. Then I'll take some other questions. Oh, one more, sorry. There we go, then I'll do the other stuff.
Because I'm aware that over the city of Tokyo, there's extensive work, cabins and incredible work to protect Tokyo under the ground. I've seen videos of it. Against earthquake and floods, and whether the Australian government has knowledge of it or consider doing something like that for some of our capital cities like Brisbane. Underwater, under the ground work to protect from flooding or earthquakes.
So,
Mention what they have in terms
Japan is a very earthquake-prone country, as you know. The government, people have to build their resilience against earthquakes that we cannot stop from coming, and we do not know exactly when they come, and that's why there is a lot being done in terms of the physical structure of infrastructure to make it resilient. Also for floods, as you have mentioned, there are a lot of underground constructions where rain, water can be stored when it rains, and I think these technologies are also adopted in many developed countries. The fact is that even with all these things, we are not getting ahead of the risk because of what's happening from climate change. So I think, again, this conference is a time to say that, okay, exchange experience and learn from each other, but also to commit to ourselves to even more, unfortunately, frequent and intense extreme weather events, and find out how we can get ahead of the risk curve. Thank you.
Yeah, just on that, I remember on one of my visits to California, I actually went to one of the universities actually have studies on earthquakes and how it impacts the infrastructure that's under the ground. Most of the people realise what happens above the ground, but under the ground with gas and water and everything else, it's quite interesting the amount of work that has to go into making sure that infrastructure is safe. So we work with the councils. The councils have issues with their stormwater drains and valves, and that's progressively implemented following on from a natural disaster, such as a flood.
they have under the ground in Tokyo, which cabins to capture water and flooding. Maybe Brisbane could consider something.
Well, the problem with the most recent floods is it happened over such a large area. In fact, it was probably the whole southeast, so I don't know whether we'll be able to do that. But any learnings, this is where we exchange information and ideas, and of course we'll be looking at all of those options. Yeah.
Ministers will.
Yep.
That's the sort of thing we need to do possibly. Consider what we've done in Japan.
Yeah, look, that's exactly why we hold these kinds of conferences, to learn about what other countries are doing. We're very fortunate here in Australia, as a developed, wealthy country, to have developed a lot of expertise in disaster management and infrastructure. But I've certainly learned things from other countries over the last couple of days that I've been talking to our officials about as well, to pick up some of these ideas and make our infrastructure stronger in Australia as well.
Yep. Okay, that's it.
Thanks,
I'll
everyone.
let them go. Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Thanks. I think Josh was first. Yeah.
Yeah, Premier. So have you seen that interim report?
Yes, I have.
And what is it suggesting?
Okay, so Cabinet's about to consider that, so I'm not going to preempt Cabinet, but let me say this. We were absolutely correct in getting Walter Sofronow to chair this inquiry. The interim report is incredibly concerning. Cabinet will be discussing that today, and you'll be hearing from Minister Darth later on.
Is it likely it will be released? That Cabinet will release it?
Happy to release it. We just need to check with the Commissioner that he's happy to, but I don't see why there wouldn't be a problem if he gives his permission.
Will there be things in it that you have to respond to and make decisions?
There will be quick action that will need to be taken straight away. Yes.
Police have spoken about it today. One of the inspectors, Wheeler, said that there are potentially thousands of cases that will have to be reviewed. Are you shocked at the large scale?
I am shocked at the findings. Of course I am. I am incredibly concerned, and that is why Cabinet will be dealing with this interim report today. Don't forget the Commissioner still has to report at the end of December. Of course, all of the questions are not answered, but we will need to get to the bottom of how this happened.
Public hearings next Monday.
Yes.
Do you anticipate taking action though before that inquiry?
Yes, yes, yes.
Are you worried about the litigation that it might open up?
I don't want to preempt anything further. As you can appreciate, I've got a Cabinet meeting to discuss this at very shortly.
And Premier, just on speedboats, the police said that they're going to work to ban it. Would you like to see that legislated, or is the police ban enough?
Look, that was an operational matter by the Police Commissioner. I'll let the police deal with that issue. Yes.
But the banning of it was the entire state of the government.
Yeah. I'll talk to Minister Ryan about that. Okay.
You mentioned fleet speech.
Yes.
Are you looking at naming any other things, places of infrastructure?
Look, we are. Some people, the public are putting forward ideas, and people are putting forward their ideas, and that's something that, of course, I'd like to see some places in regional Queensland. I think that's really important. The late Queen did visit a lot of places across Queensland, and if there's some way that we can honour her name and her legacy, we are absolutely open to ideas. I think there's going to be a lot more ideas. Okay, thanks everyone. Thank you.